Major funding for this program is provided by grants from HSH Nordbank and First American Title Insurance Company of New York, Perfect Building Maintenance, Allied Partners, Murray Hill Properties, Bank of America, SJP Properties, Greenberg Traurig. Additional funding for this program is made possible by grants from Arbor Realty Trust, BRT Realty Trust, Burden LLP, C.B. Richard Ellis, City Habitats, City Investment Fund, Cushman and Wakefield, Eastern Consolidated, Essex Capital Partners, James D. Kuhn Real Estate Institute at Syracuse University, Massey Knackle Realty Services, Meridian Capital Group, McSam Hotel Group, Musk Development LLC, Newmark Knight Frank, Palin Enterprises, Rosenthal and Rosenthal Inc., Signature Bank, Sidney Fettner Associates, Studley, Stonehenge Partners, Swig Equities, Extreme Contracting and Deconstruction.
Hello, my name is Michael Stoller, host of Building New York. There are a few people who really know about Battery Park City and New York City development. Today my guest is Edward J. Minskoff, the man who was responsible with his partners at Olympia York to develop the commercial property in Battery Park City. Thank you for being here, Edward.
Thank you for having me.
So, Edward, when we got together, you said you were born in New York City and then you relocated in your youth a couple of places, right?
I lived my first 9 years in Washington, D.C., and then moved to Westchester for a few years, and then shuttled between Detroit, Michigan, and Southern California until after all of my schooling.
Right. Now, when you graduated from high school, you went to Michigan State.
Correct.
Okay. Because your mother was in Michigan, and
she was a resident of Detroit at the time, right?
Detroit, which was a different market. Now, what did you major in when you were at Michigan?
I majored in economics.
And after that, you then decided to move to UCLA for your MBA.
I moved to Southern California to finish up my education at UCLA. Yes.
Okay. So now you graduated at 23, I believe, your MBA, correct? And you worked 1 year like as a mortgage broker?
Well, I spent a couple years prior to that part-time in the field supervising construction, and then I worked for a year in the mortgage banking industry, and then I took a job at Cushman Wakefield.
In New York? In
New York, yeah.
And as you said when we met last week, you said you came to New York, even though people hear of the Minskoff organization, which was founded by your grandfather Sam in 1908, they think of the Minskoff. You came here, not part of the Minskoff organization, as you said to me, with a Chevy and $2,500, right?
More or less.
Okay. And so what happens? You come here to Cushman & Wakefield. What do you come to work for Cushman & Wakefield? They were a leasing broker at that time. I mean, they were a great organization, good friends of mine.
Well, I had a financial background. I had construction experience. I had mortgage banking experience, but I had no commercial leasing experience, which was critical for me in the path of where I was going and what I wanted to eventually do. And so Cushman & Wakefield offered me an opportunity, and I took it.
Okay, now at Cushman, you said to me you did a very interesting lease, a repositioning of a property with W.T. Grant.
Yeah, it was probably the first leasing transaction that involved an acquisition of an existing building in order to facilitate making this lease the new, larger lease, which was done by acquiring 1441 Broadway and then leasing 550,000 feet at 1515 Broadway.
Okay, now you're about 25 years of age, and you decide to leave Cushman, and you go to Lehman Brothers, right?
I went down to Lehman Brothers to help start two companies. One was Lehman Special Services, and one was Lehman Realty Corp.
And you stayed there, what, about 5 years?
Stayed there just a little bit less than 4 years, 4 full years.
Okay. Now, we're fast forwarding. You go to a company called Phycor?
Well, I started a company called Phycor, which I was able to do some development as well as financial services similar to what I was doing at Lehman Brothers. And that was fairly short-lived. It was only maybe 16 months. And at that timing-wise, I saw an opportunity to acquire a block of properties known as the Yours portfolio.
Yeah, tell my audience about it, because this is, this was when, I don't want to utilize the term, the city was in major difficulties. Yours had built some major properties, and what happened?
Well, the Yours companies were sold in their entirety as a public company to National CUNY. And National CUNY was owned and controlled by Warner Communications. And Warner Communications announced that they wanted to be out of the real estate business and focus entirely on the entertainment business. And that made available 9 office buildings, all of them in New York City.
Which properties were they?
They were 55 Water Street, 2 Broadway, 60 Broad, 853rd, 10 East 53rd, 245 Park, 320 Park, 1290 Avenue of the Americas, and 1301 Avenue of the Americas.
And the total square footage was what about?
Well, it was just, it was probably over 12 million square feet in the 9 buildings, but we only acquired 8 of the 9. So it was about 11 million feet.
So what does Edward Minskoff, 31, 32 years of age, do at this time? You have an opportunity to buy these buildings. The world isn't great. I know that Prudential turned this down when one of my colleagues told me. So what happened? You found this Canadian company?
Well, I had previously done business with Olympia York. They had no holdings in New York. We had talked about some acquisitions, and this opportunity came up. It seemed to me like a excellent chance for them to get a stronger foothold and at the same time give me a platform to build from.
So, as you said to me last week, you basically paid, at this time no one would believe, like $100 a square foot for these Class A office buildings. I'd say they were all Class A.
Well, we probably paid at that time close to a third of replacement cost. The properties were leased on an average of less than $10 a square foot overall, and there was some of the $334 million acquisition costs. $288 million was low interest rate debt.
So what happens? You close on the buildings, and then you become the CEO of North America and a principal with Olympia York, correct?
That's correct. And I opened offices in cities such as Boston, Chicago, Dallas, LA, San Francisco, Miami, and over a period of between 1977 and the end of '86, a company that had no interest in the continental United States. When I left at the end of '86, we owned 43 million square feet.
Okay, but let's before you left in '86, let's get to Battery Park City. Right now, we see a part of it over there in the picture. But what happens? There was a bid. Well, tell my audience a little bit about the embryo of Battery Park City, what Charlie Erstad did, and what was going on.
Well, for approximately 10 years, this 95-acre landfill sat fallow, other than 2 towers that the LEFRAC organization developed.
2 residential towers.
2 residential towers, correct. And they were developed under an FHA program. And no new development occurred pretty much for about a 10-year period when they decided, Battery Park City Corporation decided to put out this 17-acre commercial core for bid. And we were the successful bidders, and we formulated a plan that would develop 7.5 million square feet over a 6-year period.
But you know, you are a developer and you know the situation. It's difficult over a period of time to absorb this type of space. And you know, we've gone through real estate cycles up and down over the last 30 years. Now, how did you maneuver to get the tenants to go into this 7.5 million square feet? You were telling me about some of the leases. You'd buy a building from some tenants. Why don't you tell me about my audience about the Merrill Lynch and the home insurance and so on?
First and foremost, the success of this development primarily was driven by the fact that we built it entirely at one time, which meant that we had all the infrastructure, all the public space, all the outdoor space and indoor space as well, completed prior to the first tenant moving in.
That included the World
Winter
Garden, the Winter Garden also?
Yeah, Winter Garden, or Palm Court as they call it, which was at that time a $34 million structure that had no economic value other than the services and public space and openness that it provided in adjacency to the other 4 towers that were developed down there. The first large lease that we did was with Home Insurance, where we acquired 59 Maiden Lane from Home Insurance and committed to lease, and they committed to lease 665,000 square feet under a long-term lease in Building A at World Financial Center. Shortly after construction commenced, George Scharfenberger, who was then chairman of their parent company, called and asked if they could void the lease, sign a new lease in 59 Maiden Lane because they were taking the company private. We in turn renegotiated their position to lease them space at 59 Maiden Lane and replaced them in Building A with Oppenheimer for the exact amount of square footage, and backed it up with the headquarters for with Dow Jones. So that basically leased Building A almost in its entirety.
And then you went. Then it was Merrill Lynch, correct?
No, the next
Express?
large transaction after the Oppenheimer Dow Jones leases were American Express. American Express, we acquired 125 Broad, which was a building they owned at the time. They consolidated most of their divisions into a building of 2.3 million square feet and under a long-term commitment. And then shortly thereafter, probably maybe less than a year thereafter, I made a deal under a long-term lease with Merrill Lynch for 4 million square feet. So the combination of American Express and Merrill Lynch, the aggregate was about 6.3 million square feet of the 7.5 million square feet in total.
It's 1986. It's time to move on. And what happens?
Well, I opted to leave the company at the end of '86, and Olympia York acquired all of my interests, which were concentrated throughout the U.S. and the other cities where we developed and acquired properties.
So you're here now, that entity, and you start Edward J. Minskoff Equities, and the first property is a parking lot which was adjacent to the New York Hilton. What do you do over there? 1325 Avenue of the Americas.
Well, Prudential and New York Hilton owned this large site for 14 or 15 years and couldn't make up their mind what they wanted to develop on it. They sold it to me. I developed an 840,000 square foot office building on the site and leased them 70,000 square feet, that being Hilton, on the second and third floor so they could expand their convention business and have the adjacency to the hotel, the two buildings were tied together through two bridge connections, and they expanded their business, and it's been very successful.
But when you opened 1325, it was probably one of the hardest times in commercial real estate. It was 1990.
Yeah, there were a lot of difficult situations with an overbuilding at that time, excess amount of inventory building up in Midtown, and we were probably 60% leased with the long-term credit leases at that moment, and then we went into a period of probably almost 16 months without signing a lease, but we filled the building up with excellent credit-worthy tenants and probably achieved rents of anywhere from 20 to 25% above our market competition at that time because of the quality of 1325.
So after that, you go downtown. I mean, to 101 Avenue of the Americas. Tell my audience about that property.
Well, 101 Avenue of the Americas was developed within 12 months after 1325 was completed. We had a tenant for 100% of the building prior to breaking ground down there, which was probably fortunate considering the fact that today 101 is like 110% great location, vibrant area, heart of Tribeca. Back in those days, it was
pioneering.
It was a clear case of pioneering, but when you have a 21-year lease with a credit-worthy tenant, pioneering doesn't make that much difference.
Okay, and after that, you and I think Odyssey Partners and another
and
Ohio State Pence.
The state of Ohio's.
You acquire the IBM building on Madison Avenue.
In 1994. We acquired 590 Madison Avenue, known as the IBM building. IBM vacated 665,000 square feet of the million-plus square feet that the building that they had previously occupied. And then we leased up the balance of the building in a relatively short period of time.
You continued on. You go again on 6th Avenue right now, and you take over some of the Verizon or the Bell.
Well, we bought condominium interest in 1166 Avenue of the Americas, which Verizon owned and planned to vacate 100%, and we in turn leased it up 100% to J.P. Morgan Chase for under a long-term lease.
You then do another deal in joint venture with Vornado, I believe.
We bought 825 7th Avenue, and then and leased that up to three major tenants, and shortly thereafter I developed the FAA.
Yeah, when we talk about that, that's a very interesting thing. We were discussing it last week. People wouldn't know about it.
Well, there was a flyer that went out and crossed my desk, and by accident I read it. Normally I don't read the flyers too often, and it was a request for the development of a Northeast headquarters for the Federal Aviation Administration in the New York area.
And this is right near Kennedy Airport?
It's adjacent to Kennedy Airport, yeah, and on 159th and Rockaway Boulevard.
And what type of building is it?
It's a first-class office building, purely white-collar, administrative, no communications equipment, no tower equipment for communicating to any of the airlines, but executive offices for the FAA.
And you said to me it's built
It was the first building built in the United States after the Oklahoma City bombing under the new terrorist regulations, which made it bomb-proof from 300 feet with a 1,000-pound bomb, and the windows were also bulletproof.
So let's go now. Developers always like to develop, and you go now back really to your roots, right?
Well, before that, we acquired the Marriott World headquarters, which is just under 900,000 square feet down in Bethesda, and we master planned the site to build another 440,000 square feet of office space adjacent to Marriott's headquarters.
Okay, so now we go back really to your roots because you did all this work down in Battery Park City. And what do you do in this site, which was
Site 5B. Site 5B was put out under an RFP by the city.
This is near Battery Park City.
It's a kitty corner across the street from Battery Park City. It encompasses a 90,565 square foot site, bounded by West Street, Warren, Greenwich, and Murray. It had been a parking lot probably since going back into the early 60s. There was a few false starts, such as Drexel Burnham's world headquarters, Comex's world headquarters, but nothing ever materialized.
And originally you were going to build an office building here.
We had completed plans for a 1.5 million square foot office building, and then unfortunately the horrible tragedy of 9/11 came along, and Mayor Bloomberg and Deputy Mayor Doctoroff both requested that instead of building an office building on the site, we consider building a mixed-use retail and residential development.
Okay, before you, they asked, for, which you did, which we'll talk about in a second. Now, were you going to build this 1.5 million square foot building spec without a tenant?
Yes, absolutely.
You continue, okay. So now, let's talk about
continue to make the same mistakes.
No, you don't.
Over and over.
No,
is that what you're going to say?
No, I was going to say you continue to have the nerve to take the risk. Okay, the risk of not getting a tenant.
Well,
because that time was a difficult time. People were fleeing Lower Manhattan, as you know.
Well, to be in the development business, you have to have a certain part of you has to be the eternal optimist, and part of you has to be a realist at the same time, and hopefully the realist will compensate for the eternal optimist. Most of the time it should, but sometimes it doesn't.
Okay, so let's talk about this project, because this is really going to make, it's Tribeca, or it's Lower Manhattan, but what they've called Tribeca truly now, because Lower Manhattan has had limited amount of retail. It's been under-retailed. And what you've done, and I think you told me near Thanksgiving, 2 of the major retailers are going to open. How many square feet of retail do you have there?
We have just under 190,000 square feet of retail on basically 3 levels. There's a 400-plus car garage in the basement. And on the ground floor, we have a ground floor and second floor, we have a 70,000-foot Whole Foods, a 38,000-foot Barnes & Noble, just under 35,000 square foot Bed Bath & Beyond, 5,000 square foot Bank of America, and then we'll have a first-class restaurant going in there, and 1 other small tenant on Greenwich Street.
Now how is it going to be a shopping center, or are the stores going to have separate entrances for each one of them?
It's definitely not a shopping center.
No, I mean...
in the purest sense, it's not like a mall type of center at all. Each of the 3 major stores, the large ones, all have separate entrances, and none of them connect through to the other.
Now, Whole Foods has been, as we would call, the flavor of the last couple of years. It's become the most successful supermarket in New York City, with outrageous sales volumes and everything else. I mean, their stores in Time Warner Center, 14th Street. How do you get Whole Foods to make a decision to commit to over here?
Well, initially Whole Foods didn't want any part of this location. They weren't familiar with it, most of the decision makers. Matter of fact, all the decision makers for Whole Foods are pretty much based outside of New York. And until they did a thorough demographic study of Lower Manhattan, Tribeca, Battery Park City, and the other neighborhoods due east of Tribeca, they realized that the strength of this area would support what will be the largest store in the city.
And how large is the store?
It's about 70,000 square feet.
Okay, which is similar to the size that they have in the Bowery.
not positive, but they're close, I think.
Okay, and Bed Bath & Beyond has done very well, you know, in the west side and the east side, but for them this was a decision also, I'd say.
Well, it was a decision that they made based upon the demographics, the compelling demographics down here, and the fact that the store should benefit significantly from the growth of the residential market down
And let's talk about the residential market, because the residential market has boomed in Lower Manhattan, especially Tribeca and Battery Park City. Everybody wants to be there. Tell my audience what you're building residentially over there.
Well, we're building 2 residential condominium components. One is a 35-story tower, and then there's an adjacent building that houses 44 townhouses. It's a low-rise portion of the development, but the townhouses have exceptional views overlooking PS 234, which is a K through 6 outstanding school across the street. And then there's an aggregate of about 550,000 square feet of condominium space for sale. And then around the corner on Murray Street, we have 163 rental units, both fair market, middle and low income.
Okay, affordable. Now, that project, you have basically 1 unit left, I think you said?
We have 1 unit available for sale in the condominium.
Right. So now you're focusing again, now you're developing, you're going to go to Long Island City. What are you going to be doing in Long Island City?
Well, we have a unencumbered site there, in which we have plans for 650,000 square foot facility. I say facility because I'm not 100% sure. We have some interest in doing office there, but we also have some very compelling interest from numerous colleges to build a 1,600 room dormitory on the site, which we are presently working through the approval process.
I mean, and with what's happening in Long Island City today, because of the tax benefits for office, which is one, and because of the need for student housing, I think either one of the ideas are going to be really good.
Well, there are approximately 40,000 rooms short for the numerous colleges in the city that need housing for the kids that are live here, attending those schools, and the kids that are coming from out of state.
Now, you said to me you have 3 children, one who's a curator of a gallery and runs a magazine, correct?
My oldest son has a gallery at 33 Bond Street, focused on emerging artists. He also has a magazine called Kool-Aid, which he started. My daughter's finished her sophomore year at NYU, and then I have a younger son who's in the middle of his school year in 8th grade.
Who could be another builder of New York. But I'd like to thank you today, because I think my audience and I've got a great idea, because you've truly been a builder of New York.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate your time.
Major funding for this program is provided by grants from HSH Nordbank and First American Title Insurance Company of New York, Perfect Building Maintenance, Allied Partners, Murray Hill Properties, Bank of America, SJP Properties, Greenberg Traurig. Additional funding for this program is made possible by grants from Arbor Realty Trust, BRT Realty Trust, Burden LLP, C.B. Richard Ellis, City Habitats, City Investment Fund, Cushman and Wakefield, Eastern Consolidated, Essex Capital Partners, James D. Kuhn Real Estate Institute at Syracuse University, Massey Knackle Realty Services, Meridian Capital Group, McSam Hotel Group, Musk Development LLC, Newmark Knight Frank, Palin Enterprises, Rosenthal & Rosenthal Inc., Signature Bank, Sidney Fettner Associates, Studley, Stonehenge Partners, Swig Equities, Extreme Contracting and Deconstruction.